bunch of fish. Look, get this one just cruising right in front of. Boom, I got that. On June 20th, 2024, the redfish creel limit was lowered, and just like speckled trout, we cannot keep as many redfish as before. I hate that this happened, but keep watching and you may get a new insight that's different from the same old thing being regurgitated on social media. I'll begin by defining the new creel limit set forth by Louisiana's Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and exploring the following questions to understand why the redfish limit was dropped in the first place. Why was the redfish limit changed? Aren't people catching a bunch of redfish? Aren't pokey boats and bow fishing responsible too? And, finally, can the redfish make a comeback? I'll go over each one by one, and if you have anything to add, then feel free to use the comment section below. But before we get started, if you want to be notified next time I post a video, then please consider subscribing to this channel. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thank you so much. What is the new redfish creel limit for Louisiana? The new redfish creel limit in Louisiana is 4 redfish daily limit per angler, 18-inch minimum and 27-inch maximum, no bull reds, which are redfish over 27 inches, and no guide limits. More on this in a moment. How is this different from the previous redfish bag limit? It's really not terribly different. The old redfish creel limit in Louisiana was 5 redfish daily limit per angler, 16-inch minimum and 27-inch maximum, 1 bull red, or a redfish that's over 27 inches, and guide limits allowed. The difference here is that you get to keep 1 less redfish, and that minimum length is 2 inches longer than what was previously allowed. Furthermore, you used to be able to keep 1 redfish over 27 inches in length, whereas now you cannot keep redfish that long. On top of that, if you were on a chartered fishing trip, the guide was allowed to catch his limit and give it to you. This also included a deckhand's limit if a deckhand was present. With the new limit, that is no longer the case, though they are allowed to help you catch your limit if you so desire. And this brings us to our next question. Why did we drop the limit for redfish in Louisiana? The short of it is that the redfish population is in dire straits. Simply put, there's not as many redfish as there used to be, and the number of sexually mature redfish required to maintain the stock has been reduced. And this is the important part. This has happened to such a point that they cannot replenish the redfish population faster than we are depleting it. Yes, I understand that there are credible people who say otherwise. So, if you keep watching, I'll acknowledge those arguments and give you some ideas to consider. So, going back to the redfish limit being dropped. The biologists at Wildlife and Fisheries made a stock assessment in 2022 that indicated something was terribly wrong with Louisiana's redfish population. First, overfishing of redfish is occurring, but it's not depleted. Second, overfishing occurred most in the last decade, 80%. After that, recreational landings make up the majority of harvested redfish, and recreational landings are at their lowest since the 1980s. Finally, the current estimate of redfish recruitment is at the lowest level ever. You can see that stock assessment in its 148-page splendor in the video description below. Now let me warn you, it is not for the faint of heart. They have that kind of math with letters in it and more than a few $10 words adorning its pages. Either way, it does paint a pretty damning picture. Something is wrong with Louisiana's redfish. Now, here comes some broad brushstrokes. There was a lot of back and forth between Louisiana Wildlife Commission, a slew of fishing guides of different pedigrees, the Coastal Association, see what I did there? The Joint Natural Resources Committee, and even yours truly. There was a lot of back and forth on the best way to handle the redfish creel limit, and that is putting it lightly. And that's because some people just weren't having any problems catching redfish. They thought that there was no problem with Louisiana's redfish population because they weren't experiencing such a problem, or at least they weren't admitting to it. This is a fair observation, which leads us to our next question. But aren't people still catching a bunch of redfish? Yes! And no. The answer really depends on where you're fishing in Louisiana. For example, some areas have just been more productive than others. If I wanted to catch a bunch of redfish, I would go to a place like Venice, especially when the river is low. I really wouldn't bother with the marsh around Lake Pontchartrain because there just aren't as many redfish there as there are in other places like Venice. I think that what happened is that some people are fishing in the best destinations in Louisiana and they're just not seeing much of a difference. Whereas people in other parts of Louisiana are scratching their head wondering what happened to the redfish. And this has been my experience, depending on where I am fishing. Some places I found lots of redfish and other places not so much. After all, I don't fish just one area, but across Louisiana's coast. So, if other people's anecdotal evidence counts, then so does mine. I'd say that there's been an overall decline in the redfish population in Louisiana, with some places being hit harder than others. My own anecdotal evidence: redfish numbers while sight fishing. Whenever I go sight fishing for redfish, which quick sidebar is highly recommended for your own inshore fishing development, I bring along a clicker to keep count of how many redfish I see. This is not redfish caught, but redfish seen. I do this to give me an idea as to how many fish there are in an area. On a standard Louisiana sight fishing trip, I'd say that it's average to see about 60 redfish. A really good day would be 200 plus or more. Sometimes I would come across schools of redfish that would stretch as far as I could see. These schools are really uncountable, but you get the idea. However, unfortunately, in recent years, I would go out and count only 20-something redfish after a long day of hitting the water. And these are the same bodies of water that I would previously easily count 60 plus fish in. Well, what the heck is going on? Obviously, their numbers aren't exploding. So here's what I think probably happened to Louisiana's redfish. Now, here's a quick disclaimer. What follows are just my own thoughts and ideas. If you want hard science, then you need to check out that 148-page stock assessment. and good luck with that, because most people have the attention span of a goldfish these days. Anyway, I think that there are a multitude of things that have contributed to killing redfish and not allowing them to reproduce. And those would be inshore anglers like me and you, bow fishing, coastal erosion, charter fishing, menhaden reduction fishing, also known as like the pogie boats, and last but not least, the freshening. All of those things to some degree have contributed to the loss of redfish over the years, but I think the big one was the freshening. But what is the freshening? It's the period of historical flooding from freshwater rivers that took place on Louisiana's coast from 2011 to 2020. In a nutshell, I feel that habitat used by redfish to spawn was made inaccessible. If you really do know inshore fishing, then you know that redfish need a particular salinity in order to spawn, just like speckled trout. Yes, redfish can survive in freshwater, but they still need salty water to reproduce. I think that salinity was made scarce for sexually mature redfish, also known as bull reds, due to record flooding from rivers across Louisiana's coast, most notably the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers. That's it in a nutshell, but there is a lot more to it, so you'll find my guide to the freshening most helpful. It's linked up below. But aren't the bow fishing guides shooting all the redfish in the face? While this method of taking redfish does not personally appeal to most inshore anglers, to include myself, the fact of the matter is that we don't know how many redfish are taken by bow fishing. That's why Wildlife and Fisheries established a bow fishing permit in order to begin accounting for this effort, which is fair. After that, the elephant in the room has always been recreational fishermen. Nothing has directly killed more redfish than dead shrimp on a jig head. With that said, I do think that there is an obvious disparity between the fish having the choice to bite and the fish having no choice of being shot. And that there is a giant difference between the redfish getting a break and not getting a break. But aren't the pogie boats killing all the redfish? Yes, they definitely kill a bunch and leave them floating in the water, but not as many as recreational anglers take home in an ice chest, at least not according to page 128 of the 2022 stock assessment, where recreational anglers still account for 97.9% of the redfish catch. However, I assume this bycatch is mostly bull reds responsible for spawning new redfish and not the juvenile slot redfish routinely targeted by inshore anglers. With that said, when we inshore anglers point our fingers at the menhaden reduction industry for their bull red bycatch, I feel that we are missing the point. What they are actually killing is far worse for Louisiana's entire fishery as a whole. If you're not sure, then you really ought to check out this article I wrote. Believe me, menhaden reduction fishing is the worst, and there's over 100 years of history to prove it. That article is linked up in the video description and really drives home what's so awful about the pogie boats. So yeah, the menhaden reduction industry is dead weight on Louisiana's coast, but in my humble opinion, hasn't hurt redfish as much as the freshening. Can Louisiana's redfish population make a comeback? My personal opinion, maybe. And that's a big maybe depending on a few things. Things like fishing pressure, the saltening, the return of speckled trout, subsequent decreased fishing pressure on redfish, and maybe the new redfish limit helping out. That's a lot, so I'll explain. The fishing pressure on redfish increased during the 2010s. I feel that there was an increased fishing effort for redfish during the freshening, largely due to the fact that speckled trout were pushed further out and made scarce by the record amount of river water. And I'm being serious, that's what I saw. Guides and anglers who were traditionally trout diehards were forced to set their sights on redfish. When I used to guide from 2011 to 2013 out of Shell Beach, it was somewhat of a heresy to focus only on redfish. Redfish were considered to be like a plan B to speckled trout. A guide who came back to the dock with a limit of speckled trout was held in higher regard than another who came back with only a limit of redfish. Now, obviously this didn't apply to everyone, but I definitely saw that culture, and that culture was somewhat changed by the freshening. Then, all of a sudden, people working part-time non-fishing jobs realized the low barrier to entry to becoming a charter captain and the associated easy weekend cash to be made. Yeah, I got news for you. It's not hard getting the Coast Guard 6-pack license, and it's even less hard to sit in the nearest pond with a bucket of dead shrimp and catch the hell out of redfish. Anybody becoming a charter captain for any reason other than the love of it, because you had better be about that life, isn't going to see the virtue of going all out for a limit of speckled trout. That requires getting up earlier, riding further, cleaning more fish, paying for live bait, and other things that take up time and money. Then there was tournament fishing. The increased fishing pressure of the 2010s also coincides with the rise in redfish tournament fishing. Now, these are mostly catch and release tournaments. I understand that. But even if the discard mortality rate is 0 and no redfish ever dies in the live well or at weigh-in, there's still that many more boats zipping around, burning shorelines, scattering schools, and otherwise making life for redfish a living hell. On top of that, boat fishing rose in popularity, and now there's more boats zipping around at night, running every nook and cranny of the marsh, vacuuming up redfish left and right with arrows. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm saying that's what I've seen. So, my point here is that the freshening put more fishing pressure on redfish, and that coincided with an increase in newcomers to inshore fishing who focused on redfish, including the guide industry, bow fishing, and tournament fishing. As a result, more redfish were being shot, hooked, thrown in an ice chest, run over by a tower boat, and all the while their spawns are diminished by the record flooding. But now the saltening is upon us. I feel that the saltening is helping Louisiana's coastal fishery as a whole bounce back. Oysters, shrimp, trout, redfish, everything. What is this saltening? Well, it's the opposite of a freshening. When Louisiana's rivers go down, the water is able to clear, salinity rise, and habitat for inshore species is restored. And that's it in a nutshell, but if you're interested to learn more and see some cool data, then please check out my guide to the saltening in the video description below. So, now that we have this saltening, we are seeing the speckled trout make a comeback, which, of course, is aided by the new limit introduced last November. It's a safe assumption that this could take some of the fishing pressure off of the redfish. I certainly hope so. In addition to that, the redfish will be able to get in some good spawns and make new redfish, and there will be good habitat for those redfish to grow in. But will the new redfish limit actually help restore the population? Given everything mentioned above, it's possible that the redfish population could make a comeback to its former glory without having reduced the bag limit. But I'm not so sure because there's a problem. Redfish grow slow. See, I was, and still am, optimistic for speckled trout bouncing back because they grow fast. They become sexually mature in about a year, depending when they were spawned. But not redfish. Redfish take about 5 years to become sexually mature. That's 5 long years of dodging tower boats, ducking arrows, sidestepping dead shrimp, and staying out of an ice chest just to make it to where they can spawn in the first place. And that's why I like the idea of releasing bull reds. Those are the breeders we need to restore Louisiana's redfish population. But they have to get to be that size in the first place, which is why I am not a fan of reducing the bag limit by 1 and the size limit by 2 inches. That's because it only reduces the redfish harvest by 36.9%, which barely clears the 35% reduction recommended by wildlife and fisheries biologists. Why the 4 fish bag limit is not that great. The new redfish creel limit isn't that great because it puts the population on track to be restored, hold on to your seat, to be restored by the year 2050. What? Gee, what can possibly go wrong in the next 26 years? Another BP oil spill? Another freshening? More coastal erosion? Another big-ass hurricane? Who knows? 26 years. Do you think that's an acceptable time to wait? What we had previously pushed was a 3-fish bag, 18 to 24 inches, no bull reds and no guide limits. That would have reduced the annual redfish harvest by 55% and put Louisiana on track to have her redfish population back by 2034. So, 10 years or 26 years? Which sounds better to you? Comment below. Where I'm getting these fancy numbers from. You can find these figures in this chart, which details the harvest reduction per slot per creel without keeping 1 redfish over slot. If it's not obvious, the stricter the limit, the greater the reduction. I sourced it from this report, Red Drum Management Scenarios, which is linked below. You can also watch Louisiana's lead marine biologist, Jason Adriance, give his presentation on the stock assessment and management scenarios in this YouTube video, which is easier to watch than reading a long 100+ page report. If this is all new to you, then I strongly recommend giving it a view. What will ultimately happen to Louisiana's redfish and inshore fishing as a whole? All I can do is hope that the saltening and this new redfish creel limit for Louisiana will bring the fishing back to its former glory. I really don't want to be one of those guys talking about the glory days and only have memories left. That would be tough, especially considering the conservation success stories we see elsewhere in the United States, like that of smallmouth and largemouth bass. I can be optimistic because the redfish action was worse during the 80s. And if we were able to recover from that, then surely we can recover from this. After that, I'll continue to set the example by not killing every single redfish that I come across, even though I do feel it's okay to keep redfish to eat. So, if you're also setting that example, then my hat's off to you. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider sharing it with your friends. And if you'd like to know when the next one goes live, then please subscribe and ring that bell for all notifications. Tight lines, and thank you for watching.